Welcome to the Wild Geese PBI Museum. You may be asking yourself, how in the hell did I end up on this channel and why am I here? Well, these are good questions I ask myself too. Background on me. My name is Brian. I am the proud owner of and operator of the Wild Geese Poor Bloody Infantry Museum. The concept of this was born years ago. Basically, my background, 10 years U.S. Army Infantry, active duty and National Guard, 26 years of law enforcement as patrol, tactical team, and narcotics. Throughout my entire history, I have been a collector of militaria. My belief is that we are the caretakers for the memories and the items that were associated with some of the finest individuals that have faced some of the hardest of times. The things that got me through when I was going through many a different crisis as law enforcement or as in the military was knowing that there have been challenges faced by so many before. I recently retired, and my mission was always that all of the items I've amassed and the museum that I have created, that I'd be able to share with people. The problem is, as you can pretty well guess, I have a house not big enough to invite the general public in, and I have a wife that probably would ultimately take my life if I invited everybody in. And as you can see off to my right, I have my trusty guard captain that is always at the ready. So the idea was born that I would bring you, the viewers, in to see this collection. The goal and the mission of this is not just to show you the items I've collected over the years, but to share the ideas and also to basically give you the idea that there are treasures out there. There are years of history that unfortunately every day, every week, every month we are losing. So many of the best people that have faced some of the worst of times and have come through the other side, these items that they carried to basically remind themselves of the struggles past and the victories that they held, are being lost. It is really a goal to share this, to be able to collectively as a group, as a community, to come together and go, hey, what is this? Can you tell me something about it? Or find ultimately a home where this item is going to be remembered and the name of that person associated will never be forgotten. It was something told to me a long time ago that Roman legionnaires, and the idea in the Roman era is that if a person was ever to be remembered, their name must be written down, quite often on the side of the highways on stones. And the idea is that as people would walk along, they would say the name of the person. Therefore, they were never lost to history. The items you're about to see in a quick walk through this museum all have names, faces, dates, and places in time. Some of the things we're going to discuss can be controversial. Views are always differing, and that's good. This is a place where we can meet and we can talk about things and we can actually be straightforward. I am not going to be politically correct. I'm probably being extremely nice for this first video, and after that I can't be sure. If everything goes well and the sharing of this information, input by you as to what you'd like to see, as well as some of the things I'd really like to delve into, the goal is to progress out even further and introduce you to other individuals that have amazing collections, these speakeasies of history that are laying in a neighborhood near you, that unless you knew the person, the secret knock, or the password, you'll never know that these actually exist. The other thing is that there are a plethora of museums that are in the American Legions, veterans of foreign wars, or even small museums and communities that are often lost. And if you're not looking for them, you're missing out on some of the best times and best places and people. So when you're touring around next time, you might find that one VFW to go in and have a cocktail of your choice and have a walkthrough of history that, again, will not be recorded anywhere else except for those hallowed halls in which these items lie. So if you haven't flipped off yet and you haven't freaked out yet, let's take you downstairs and take a look at the Museum of the Wild Irish PBI. And welcome to the Wild Geese PBI Museum, better known as the Bunker. The Wild Geese PBI, what it stands for, the Wild Geese is towards my heritage of being Irish. Back in the 1690s, the War of the Kings, ultimately the Irish rebels that fought against the Loyalists would ultimately leave Limerick and go throughout Europe with their families, relocate and fight for many a cause and many a nation. It's not just limited to the Irish. The idea is any person that has ever picked up the sword in a calling for that which is considered to be just or for sacrifice for one's country or beliefs. The poor bloody infantry was a term from the trenches for all of the Welsh, Cornish, English, Irish, Scottish, all of those that suffered and slogged from 1914 to 1918, and it's carried on. I have been honored to be paired with a museum in Lurgan in Ireland, as well as to have an individual hand certificates for the Wild Geese Association for those that served as mercenaries throughout the world. You will see many a different tale from many a different era as we open up these doors. So the Wild Geese PBI Museum has many different eras that have been captured, items that have been collected, bought, some reproduction, some gifted, some real. We begin with the oldest portion of the section in the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879. The film Zulu or Rorke's Drift, known by many people. Items like this Martini Henry rifle that made its way from Afghanistan to this museum, of which we'll talk about in another episode. The next portion of the museum is the Great War, World War I, 1914 and 1918. This representation has the personal effects of men who served both on the Allied as well as Central Powers. The personal effects carried by the soldiers in the trenches, as well as the mechanization of war, such as the MG08 heavy machine gun, which we'll talk about the impacts in a conflict such as the Battle of the Somme on 1 July 1916. The next section of the Wild Geese PBI Museum is, of course, one of the greatest generations, those that served in the rank and file of World War II, 1938 to 1945. The museum is predominantly European theater that this is reflected. Here you will see items such as that carried by the British Army, the British paratroop forces, as well as the American Army. And then we also are showing the items carried by the German Heer, as well as the Fallschirmjäger or parachutists that were part of the German Army. All of these items have a story, whether they impacted those troops facing them or for the troops that carried them. And we'll also talk about the only portion of this museum that is the Pacific Theater. And this is one of the reasons why I was inspired to create this channel and to share the information, is the journey that I took by doing an investigation into a close friend of mine's Silver Star that was a member of his family. And by researching it, we were able to basically show an amazing story of a man's sacrifice for his fellow man. The Wild Geese PBI Museum also covers the Vietnam conflict, a conflict which is embroiled in all kinds of different arguments. But for the men and women that served there, they will never be forgotten. For the United States portion of the conflict from 1962 until the last troops were out by 1975, these items have been collected reflecting both the American, the Army of Republic of Vietnam, as well as the individuals we fought against, the Viet Cong main force, local force, and North Vietnamese Army. For me, this has a history that directly impacted me as a young soldier and as a young police officer. Many of the people that I served with during that time were Vietnam veterans and were some of the finest leaders I have ever served with. As in any conflict, and you will see, a lot of research goes into many of these items. For the museum portion of the library is down here, but you will see that there are many a bookshelf throughout the house. That research and doing your homework to find out about these items that you collect is absolutely necessary. One of the museum's most misunderstood and misrepresented conflicts was the conflicts that we saw being fought in Sub-Africa, Rhodesia, Southwest Africa, Namibia, Angola during the 1970s, 1980s. This was a direct conflict of the Cold War. As we had talked about with the Vietnam section, we were facing against a force coming from China, from Russia. The museum represents the individuals that fought in all of those conflicts, to include those members of Zanla, Zipra, and SWAPO that ultimately would be engaged with the forces of Rhodesia as well as South Africa. This is a part of the history that I really like to talk about because it brings up a lot of differing views, and it also shows a complexity of history and how these greater struggles can be focused down into a smaller theater of operations. The last portion of the museum is near and dear to my heart, and it involves not only the conflict in the north of Ireland, Operation Banner or the Troubles, but it also reflects too the conflicts that were being faced, especially by the British Army at the same time, the Falklands conflict or the British Army of the Rhine. What you will see in this museum is a reflection of every piece of uniform that developed from the first deployment in August of 1969 to ultimately what we would see the end of deployment of Operation Banner by 1998. All of these items, I have had the honor of knowing the men that have carried these items, many of them which we will talk about, especially when it comes to the 321st EOD or explosive ordnance disposal, or to the squatty on the ground, and the ingenuity of how they ultimately would design their equipment to become more effective in the field, which ultimately would affect the same way that the U.S. Army would go with the way that we carry equipment into the field and conflict zones. On the other side, I've had the honor to know many of the person who was members with the Oglach na Éireann, or Irish Republican Army, or Provisional Irish Republican Army. This ranges from all the way from 1916, all the way actually before that, when we started seeing where did the conflict begin in the 1100s and working up through that rich history of Ireland. This has seen a struggle of a different type. The ones that were carried out on the street, as well as those who were interned in Long Kesh, or ultimately the H blocks, which in the 1980s would see a hunger strikes, the ultimate form of sacrifice. There is a lot of flashpoints to discussing this history, and I am always going to be one to show honor to every individual that has ever touched this museum with an item that meant something to their family, to their comrades, to their friends, and I will share that with you. And I hope to hear from individuals on their experiences as well. First off and foremost, thank you for making it through this first video. I'd like to thank everybody that made this possible, that have ultimately brought me into the 21st century of technology, as well as have supported this vision. I'd like to thank Bob, Tiff, Jerry, Stan, of course the captain, who's spent, as I am. I'd like to think that also you are going to help build this. This is not about likes, about money, about anything other than developing a community where we can ultimately come together and save history. There are so many things that we have seen and done collectively throughout generations, and it is amazing to see what we can do in the future. So I'd like to say thank you to the men and women that have served, past, present, and to the future. To you, I say, I look forward to our next video. Sláinte, my friends.